Welcome to this episode of The Dealer Playbook, a podcast that explores what it takes to create a thriving career right here in the retail auto industry. I'm your host, Michael Cirillo, ecstatic to be joined by my pal, Michelle Denogean. She's the CMO at Roadster, and we're talking about how technology can increase productivity. I'm excited about this one. I mean, first of all, let's talk about your vast knowledge for a minute. They just don't make salespeople chief marketing officers in big tech companies. So you've obviously had a journey that brought you to this point. Bring me into this, because I'm excited to hear a little bit more about your story and how do you actually arrive at being a chief marketing officer for a company like Roadster?
Sure. So my background, I think, is a little unique in that I used to tell people that I don't come from automotive,
right.
But I don't think I can say that anymore because it's been about 15 years or so. But prior to being in automotive, I've been at a lot of technology companies in different industries. So real estate, I worked in online dating for a little while. But I think most of what all of these companies have in common is that they're connecting businesses with consumers. And so it's sort of become, I think, an area of expertise. But I think over the course, I've held a lot of different roles at these companies. So whether it was, product development role or an operational role or a marketing role, I've always been really inquisitive about the customers and about the business. And so I feel like, my experience is I grew up in a digital world from a career standpoint, definitely not from a life experience standpoint.
Right.
I wish I could say that. And just over the course of my career, I've just really liked to help companies and customers solve big problems. And so I think that served me well through my career and has allowed me opportunities to grow. And so now I run marketing and analytics and training and insights at Roadster. I did that similar role at Edmunds prior, where I ran marketing and analytics there as well.
Okay, and I'm dying to know how. Let me see if I can ask this the right way. Usually a negative stigma surrounding online dating, but I'm obviously a huge boom, and I happen to know couples who have met each other through that medium. But I'm not going to ask you if that's where you met your significant other. What I want to know, though, is there any similarity to that industry or real estate to the auto industry? Or do we truly function in a vacuum the way a lot of people try and make it sound?
Yeah, it's a good question. And first of all, I'll answer your other question. I did not meet my husband with online dating.
I wasn't asking.
but you'd be surprised how many people actually ask me that question because it's just natural, I think, that I work.
You don't use your own product, Michelle? Come on. How bought in were you?
Actually met him at the airport, but that's a whole other podcast.
Well, there you go.
No, but the similarities for me across all of those is just really understanding behavior. And I think whether you're seeking out, a new spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, or you're buying a house, it's about connection. And so, we as human beings don't work in a vacuum, right? All of those experiences, the experience I had with online dating, the experience I had, buying that last purchase on Amazon, the experience I had buying my last house, all of those things build up to what my expectations are when it comes to car buying. And so I think the connection is that it's the same customer, whether they're dating or they're buying a home, right? Like the consumer is the consumer and they're constantly evolving their needs and what they're trying to accomplish. And they bring all of that into whatever, retail experience they're doing next.
I love that on so many levels. I love how you just answered that because it immediately made me think of how the vacuum does exist from a mental perspective inside of this industry. Perhaps it's the dealer, perhaps it's the vendor, whoever it might be. But the fact that if you just peel back the onion skin one layer and realize, but the customer, like what you just said is so powerful, that the customer doesn't work in a vacuum. I think we've tried, and maybe I'd love your insights on this. I think we've tried in some ways to understand, oh, on Facebook, I can target life events, which obviously would suggest that there's no vacuum, yet we still run the same type of advertising and the same type of messaging, which suggests vacuum, vacuum, vacuum. Is that contributing to, I guess, a decrease in effectiveness of how we're currently, I guess, are we underutilizing current platform models because we can't get that vacuum out of our minds?
I think so. I think we have to think about the consumer as a whole, and they're constantly evolving. So if we're in a vacuum thinking that what worked yesterday is going to continue to work tomorrow, then we're really missing the boat, in my opinion. I had somebody ask me once, well, we haven't really fundamentally changed the way that we sell cars. So why are people less satisfied? This was a question like probably about 3 or 4 years ago in an interview that I had. And my answer is very connected to what we're talking about here, which is we didn't change, but the customer did. So the expectations we have of everything that is happening around us is what's informing whether or not we're happy with our current car buying experience or not. So if we aren't evolving, if we're not, keeping up with all these other things, whether it's our marketing message or our sales process, then we're going to be left behind as it relates to the consumer mind share. As in how they buy cars in the future.
This is going to be a weird question because it's as directly applicable to me, the asker of said question, as it is to anybody that's listening.
Are you going to ask me about online dating again?
It's complicated. No, it really is along the lines of what you're saying. What do I need to do, in your opinion, and by me, what do I need to do? This is a generalized question for all listening. What do we need to do to understand that we are also customers of products? You brought up Amazon. I mean, gosh, I could do a whole podcast about what showed up from Amazon today. I know I'm going to get home from the studio and there's going to be an Amazon box in my foyer. I'm a customer. Why is it so hard for me to understand the customer? Why is it so hard for me to understand? Like, my expectations have shifted. How come I can't translate that through to the people I'm trying to sell something to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I just think we're too inside it. But when I run workshops, a lot of times what I have people do is actually go and try to buy from themselves. What I mean by that is, and sometimes we'll even switch. We'll say, okay, well, it's not fair maybe for your dealership, but let's have you do this other dealership, across the room from you, because you have a different perspective. But if you go to the website and you start that process and call the dealership and, see, does the pricing match what they quoted on, like all of those things,
right? You
have to sort of go through it as a consumer through that journey yourself. And I don't think, and it's, no fault of our own, we don't buy cars the way a typical consumer buys, right? Like a lot of people in retail, actually, they don't buy cars. they take this one home today and that one home the next day. And so I just think we have such a different experience of the car purchase or acquisition than our customer that sometimes we need to take a moment, breathe, and actually shop as if our consumers are shopping. And that is a very eye-opening experience. And it sounds very easy, but I just think it's about taking the time to do it.
And now I'm transitioning or segueing a little bit into the buzzword of 2020 or the buzz phrase or the buzz title, digital retailing. Some have made a stance already. No, it's remote retailing. Some have made a stance. No, it's virtual selling. Come on, guys. Well, we're talking about the same thing here. Did we approach digital retail? See, because again, sometimes it feels like it's a little too in a vacuum. All customers on the face of the planet want to buy online. And then I look at my dear sweet mother-in-law who still believes that if she does not specifically click the sign out button on her Yahoo Mail account, that her emails start floating into the ether, she will not buy a car online. Like that's she still drives around Las Vegas paying her bills. Oh, I got to pay my Macy's card, and then I got to drive 45 minutes away to Nordstrom's, and I got to, you know what I mean? Like, so how do we actually navigate digital retail, the topic of digital retail, in a way that makes sense versus, I guess, maybe this broad stroke of like, no, everybody's going to buy cars online?
It's a good question. And I think really what it comes down to is just offering a flexible experience. Mm-hmm. To your point, not everybody's going to do it. And that's why in a lot of ways, the term digital retailing, I just think is, it's a buzzword for sure. It's overrated because I think people immediately think, oh, e-commerce, everybody's going to do this 100% online. But it's really just retail, and how do we digitize the process, not how do we, get every consumer on the face of the planet to buy this way. And so it's really about having the option and making sure, and this is something I feel really passionate about, making sure it's consistent with your in-store experience. This is where I think my marketing background comes in full force. You never want to put a message out to the universe that you cannot deliver upon. It's actually worse to put it out there and not deliver on it than to not have ever put it out there to begin with. And so that seamless experience, that consistency of what you do online to connecting that to that in-store experience is so vital. And it's up to the consumer to choose how much they do online and, what they come into the showroom to do with you in person, if they can, right? We're still living in a COVID world.
Sure.
But having done, if I am that type of consumer that wants to do a lot of it online, if I come into the showroom and I cannot pick up where I left off, or you have this Groundhog's Day experience where the dealership's like, can you fill out a credit app again? You've lost the trust of the consumer who spent the time. So it's about being flexible. It's about being able to handle, your relative that, drives around to Macy's and pays your bills, as well as the millennial that's just going to want to do all of it online, and everybody in between. It's a spectrum, right? So we need to be flexible enough. I do think that there's still a huge advantage to having the dealership and letting people come and kick the tires and take delivery of the vehicle and all those things. That is actually our competitive advantage as dealerships, right? Because there's players out there that are selling online, but you can't do that. So how do we take advantage of that at the same time that we're deploying all this optionality for the consumer to do it the way they want to buy?
Yeah, I love that. I'm really glad you brought up in-store process as well. I feel deeply that what we typically do, right? And this is coming from a place of love, my beloved DPB gang. Okay. You know, this is coming. I don't bring things up just for the sake of it, but NADA is going to roll around. Everybody's going to be promoting digital retail. And I'm not knocking you, but these dealer owners, GM stakeholders, they're going to roll through and be like, obviously we need this. And they're going to buy it with the hopes that it's going to lasso the sun, the moon, and the stars for them. They're going to implement it. Then they're going to say it doesn't work. Then they're going to, and we're in this perpetual cycle of vendors in the car business just do stuff to make more money. And then vendors in the car business will be like, no, and I'm not trying to make dealers sound negative here. Obviously, my intent here, but that's historically, that's what we've seen. We just buy into the buzz. So I love that you brought up in-store process. And I'm curious about what your recommendations would be for a store that's thinking through this and going, hey, I love what Michelle's saying. We have to be flexible. It makes sense that we need to provide the option, that there is a spectrum. What do you recommend they do to lean into it versus having it and trying to figure it all out after the fact and, not connecting the dots that process and experience and all of that still matters?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And we're actually in the middle of doing a digital retail master certification with the driving sales organization focused on this. But I think the thing that really needs to be looked at is the current sales process. And, when you're implementing this in order to create that consistency, The unique thing about digital retailing is that it truly does touch everyone within the variable ops side in some way, right? You can limit it. You don't have to boil the ocean, so you can start in small groups, but in some way it's going to touch your internet BDC. It's going to touch your showroom team. It's going to touch your sales manager. It's going to touch your F&I team. So you really do have to think about, how do I sell today? What is my current sales process? What am I trying to accomplish? Right. And for a lot of people, it is just what you just said. It's about modernizing the experience. But there are other things happening at the store that this also can solve. So really, what are my challenges with my current process? And if I could wave a magic wand, it's one of my favorite questions, wave a magic wand, what would I change? And that work is hard. You have to stop and really think about that. But we know that the number one thing that leads to success, which is retailing after, we've implemented thousands of dealerships on our platform, is that when they sit and they strategize and they think about their sales process and they have somebody in charge who's going to sort of keep everybody accountable, those are the stores that are most successful because they have the buy-in from the team. They've sort of mapped it out. They've told everybody how it's going to, evolve their role. And now they've got this sort of streamlined process that takes the technology into consideration versus just having it on the side as like a plug-in. We'll just sell cars online and we don't need to touch anything. And I'm not saying to completely blow everything up. In fact, we have a favorite question we ask often is when they say, well, how do we deliver cars? Well, how do you deliver cars today? Like so much of it is like, well, how do you do it today? Because it may not be that different, but it's just going through that exercise of thinking about each step and how you're going to use the technology to do that as part of your process.
Yeah, that's incredible. Let me ask you this. I'm looking at my current sales process. From your vantage point, what are some key items I should be looking for that would give me an indication of something that needs to be worked on versus maybe I'm doing okay?
I think friction points. That would be what I would be looking at. Where is the friction? So we know that consumers really don't want to spend as much time as they usually do at the dealership. And I think a lot of that is because our process is so linear, right? When you come into the showroom, you do a needs assessment with that customer, you do a test drive, you come back and you look at your different options, you do your first pencil, you go to the sales manager. It's so linear that salesperson never leaves the customer's side, but they're going back and forth. So all of that back and forth is what's causing time. Mm-hmm. And then, F&I, another sort of friction point. A time tends to be a friction point. And so I'd be looking at where are those points where you're spending a lot of what I call downtime, waiting because you're waiting for another, person at the store in order to get something accomplished. And that sort of leads into this whole productivity exercise because this downtime that we are, talking about as friction points is exactly where the technology can help. So when you think about, the technology and being able to empower customers to do more online, you all of a sudden, as a salesperson, are free to work with multiple customers at once. You're no longer, chained to one. I say chained to one customer. It's going to come out really bad. That's not what I mean. But that one-on-one connection where you're spending 3 or 4 hours with a customer. Now you can encourage some of that behavior ahead of time, and so you can put the customer. The customer actually wants to be put to work. So you might as well try to encourage them to do as much as they're comfortable with ahead of time, because you can then work multiple customers at once, immediately remove the friction because you've taken time out of the process in the showroom. And so I think, there's not a lot of win-wins in this life, but I do think that this is one of them. And what we're seeing from those that are using the technology is that their salespeople are able to sell more per person because they're able to do so much of this, from a remote capacity, working and guiding the customer through the process.
Yeah. And what's tremendous about this is what you just said about the customer actually wants to be put to work. That might conflict initially with maybe a more traditional mindset because, we're here. It's the hospitality business. What do you mean put them to work? But they're already doing a lot of this work anyway. They're already researching. They're already in the buying process for, whatever it is, 40 some odd days or 70 days in Canada. I think 74 days in the province of Alberta is the average time it takes from first contact to, sale or whatever. They're already doing a bunch of work. But I think the fascinating thing from my perspective is it actually pushes you further to establish partnership. Hey, because there's accountability built in now. Hey, look, take care of this. I'm going to pop over here. While you're doing that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to come back. We're going to work on this. Da, 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 da. And they're active and they're engaged. They're not just sitting there on their 14th cup of, subpar, whatever, coffee, like a K cup of coffee or whatever it is. It actually establishes partnership and it gets everybody moving on the same page. Like, hey, I'm working for you and you're working for you because ultimately you're not here for me. You're here for you.
Exactly.
Which I think is really, really interesting. But it also, I wrote down here, Ali Reda. I don't know if you're familiar with Ali. He there's a big conflict a couple years ago because he actually sold the Guinness World Record, and then there was legal stuff, and then it was taken away. But we're in my books, you sell over 1,500 vehicles. But you've said something that made me think of him because of how he's established his process. It's a direct tie-in. He's not just sitting with one customer at one time. They've actually positioned an area of the store, which is like his office. And it's almost like a doctor's office. There's a waiting room. There's a room over here. There's like 3 or 4 rooms. And each one of those rooms has one of his assistants or somebody that's working on his team, helping the customer do their piece. And he's coming in like the physician, like the practitioner. All right. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Hey, we got it all going. And he's the relationship guy. And he's the one that's obviously demoing and selling, but like he has people doing different pieces of the process so that he's able to actually have 6 or 7 people going at a time. How do you sell over 100 units a month? You do it by what you just said, which I think is so powerful. Let's use the data we have on consumer behavior to go from one customer at a time to 3 to 4 to 6 to, I don't know, what can Ali push? You probably do 10, right? Where does my mindset have to be in order to pull that off, though, in your opinion?
I think you first have to embrace technology in order to do that. I think your example is great. I hadn't heard that full story before about the doctor's offices, but that's great for in-store. But you can also bridge that to working with these customers when they're at home. But you have to have the mindset that we don't have to get them into the dealership. I don't have to, sit with that customer the whole time. And that, like you said, that partnership mentality, right? And I think it really is a fundamental shift. The customer is there. If you think about how much we buy on our own, we transact, we do online. And that's, of course, gotten even greater with COVID. And, now I buy my groceries online. I never thought I would do that.
It's the best.
And so I say put the customer to work to jigger everybody's thoughts, because I think a lot of times we think, we're going to empower the customer, but we really don't want to, put them to work, because I think that really is the mindset that we need to have as an industry in order to really push forward. I think the other thing to think about is the financial impact, right? So it's very easy to get your head wrapped around doing that if you know that it's going to hit your pocketbook, that if I sell more cars per person every month, then I'm going to make more money.
Right.
So it's really not typically the salesperson. It's actually typically the sales manager that needs to get their head wrapped around it, because it is a change in process. It's a sense of experimentation, right? To really see that through.
Amazing. It really is. There's so many elements built into this where, as an owner, if I'm looking to justify a new technology piece, this is where my brain immediately goes. Like, hey, will this technology actually help increase productivity or streamline the process, remove friction? And if I can answer yes to any one of those things, then I'm seriously going to consider the technology. I will not, however, have it just for the sake of having it because the other store in my region that's on the top 10, I won't. And I think right now we're seeing kind of this mix in the industry, this half and half of people that are like, well, we tried digital retail and we're not, or I love what you said, digitizing our retail experience. We've tried that and it didn't work. And then there's those that tried it and it does work. And I guess what I love is you have a vast kind of database to pull this kind of experience from, or pull this data set from. What would you say the key factors are? So we've talked about removing friction, looking at your own sales process. What are the key factors? How is it possible in 2020 and beyond that it just doesn't work for some, but it just absolutely works brilliantly for others? What's the difference?
So we have a saying that you might have heard before at Roadster, which is that it's really only about 20% the technology and 80% what you do with it. And I think that's true with all technology. It's not just digital retailing. But that, I think the comment of it doesn't work, we have to look internal and really see for ourselves, what did we do to make it successful? And, as a vendor, it could be a scary thing to say. It's like, well, our technology doesn't work without you. But we fundamentally believe that is true, which is why we invest so much time in training and working with the dealership on implementation, because it really comes down to that. We get asked that question a lot. What is the success factor? Is it, large stores, metro areas, rural areas? Like what is the thing that really, is it luxury stores or not? And we always come down to, no, it actually is none of those things. It's having a champion in the store that's going to take a look at the process and really, push utilization of the platform. That is the single differentiator between those stores that are successful versus those that are not.
Yeah, and it really shows a divide in mindset, like a winning mindset versus just kind of a status quo mindset. It also makes me think of the best analogy I can use, and there's a point to this, is I love the idea of putting fresh paint in my home because we know it's going to make it look better. So I go to Home Depot and I bought the nicest paint rollers I could buy and the best paint and the nicest color. And guess what? The walls did not paint themselves. I still had to pick up the roller, which leads me to the point. But then there's a piece of me that just wishes somebody else could do it for me. So I call my brother-in-law, who happens to be a professional painter, contractor, and I say, how much? And then he tells me the price. And I say, but you married my sister. I didn't do that. I did end up paying him because I know in our inherent appetite is to just ultimately have somebody do it, and we want them to do it for $3 or less. Do you find that that's the case here? Like, is it when people aren't utilizing it perhaps the right way, beyond infrastructure issues? Like maybe we just don't have the bandwidth. We like the idea of it. We know that they have to utilize the tech, or else it's like a hammer that you wished would hang pictures on a wall. It's just not going to happen. Versus the gap of like, I just ultimately wish somebody would do this for me, but I'm not willing to pay what it would cost to have somebody else do this for me. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, and that's a tough one, especially because you can, leverage all of the training and capabilities that are available. But in the end of the day, if you don't hold your team accountable, then it does fall apart. So it's a little different than painting, where I don't think that you can fully outsource that. I think, we make lots of tools available. We have a Roadster Academy where they can do, learning on their own time. We have success managers that really are, helping them not just with understanding and unpacking the technology, but their sales process up front. Like you can give all of these tools, capabilities. We're not doing classes, but really, to your point before, it comes down to that mindset and just taking ownership of this is the way that we're going to do things moving forward and holding people accountable. That's the piece that you can't outsource. The rest of it, you can leverage the heck out of everything that's available to you.
Yeah, I love this. And I know I'm kind of asking these weird kind of fringe outline questions, but I think, for me, it's about understanding that even the people that are creating these solutions are mindful of the fact that as long as there are human beings on this planet, those human beings are still going to have to do something, right? You can't just sit back and turn into a blob in a gaming chair hoping that, Roadster was going to do something for you, or the other digital retailing toolers out there are going to just solve 100% of your problems. But now with that in mind, hopefully the right audience is sitting here going, yeah, I'm in a position where I'm ready to roll. I see the change happening. I've been paying attention for the last decade where you remember when people, the dealers and vendors expected you to fill out a full credit app and it would have to go into the system because somehow the finance manager didn't want to do their job and fill out the credit. Like it was a weird thing. And then we caught on and we're like, wait, what if we just did a 30-second credit app, which was really just a form, right? It was just a form saying, hey, somebody wants, there was a conflict in even that transition. No, but if it's a 30-second credit app, then I still have to call them to get all the information. But now we're at a place where I can not only fill out the credit app, but I can get financing options that I qualify for right now in 90 seconds or less. And I can seal a deal. Like that's how I purchased my last truck. And to your point about not buying cars the same way as maybe I called one of my clients. I said, I want that one.
Right.
And he sent me the link to their digitized retailing tool. And guess what? Even being in the business, it caught me off guard because I filled it out and was like, yeah, you're approved. And I emailed him and I said, okay, so now who do I need to talk to in the store? He's like, no, man, the truck's yours. You own that vehicle now. That tied directly into the powers that be. And I was, whoa. And so I love that, you have to position people's mindset to be in the right place, that it's still just not a thing that you can just install and hope it works on autopilot, that there is actually some work that needs to be done on the ground level. And you may or may not qualify to be one of those types of people, right? So now that we know that, and we got all of that stuff out of the way, what are some other ways you've observed that technology and those who embrace it have been able to increase their productivity or their output to increase the business?
Yeah. There's lots of other ways that I've seen that are interesting outside of the technology, digital retailing space. So one of the things I've seen come out of COVID is this whole idea of the contactless test drive. I don't think we as an industry would have ever thought for a million years, by the way, that we would just hand the keys over and say, okay, go. We're not going to put somebody in the car with you. And for safety reasons, we did that.
Right.
But now what I think some dealerships are seeing is that actually creates more efficiency because while they're gone, we can do a lot of other things to keep pushing that transaction forward. We can prep the deal. We can go look at their trade-in. There's a lot of things that we can do. So I've seen that. The other thing I'm really hearing a lot about is virtual F&I, like doing a video conference presentation. And I love that concept of customers not here, but we're going to walk them through the options. First, we're going to give them the opportunity to see what service and protection plans I have available on our website. And then when we actually get to the point where F&I is involved, do they need to be here in the store, or is video conferencing a way to not have them waiting for the F&I manager, but actually have them engaging? So not waiting, engaging, right, with the F&I manager over video conferencing when they're a little bit more relaxed. They haven't been at the dealership for hours on end, and they can really think about their current lifestyle. There's a funny joke that we have inside Roadster, because the last time I bought a car, I was like, I don't want any of that. Just get me out of here. It's been like 5 hours. And, but I wish I had bought tire wheel protection because boy, am I like the worst. I'm the worst at hitting my wheels and my rims. It's awful. I could have paid that plan like 100 times over. But I didn't have the brain space to really like reflect like that when I was sitting there at the end of the process. So I think that's really exciting and interesting as well, that we're now using the same video conferencing technology that we're all using for school and everything. I think everybody's got Zoom fatigue, but we're using that as it relates to how do we engage with all of these, aftermarket accessories or service plans and things that could be valuable to me.
It's interesting too, you note that, because you remember when tech really started to boom in this industry, and we would say things like, now people can shop for cars in the middle of the night in their underwear. And now with Zoom conferencing and in the ways that you've just suggested, we're validating that is in fact true. People are meeting with us.
I was gonna say, are you doing these things in your underwear? What's happening? But completely right. In fact, another trend I'm hearing is that we're not keeping the dealerships open quite as long into the evening because we can still communicate and connect with these customers after hours. Yeah. And I think that is also a really interesting trend that we're seeing is we don't have to have the showroom opened, but our employees can engage as questions arise or presentations are needed at any time of the day. Which
has an immediate impact, seen or unseen, depending on how you look at it, on the profit and loss statement in a variety of ways. So you're saying that, I'm like, okay, so just straight up in utility usage, dealership closes and I'm running down to a minimum on that side. So that's going to save me a little cheddar on the back end. But you may actually find a translation to happiness in your team, which we know has a direct correlation to productivity. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think, our employee base at these dealers, especially as we're trying to hire the younger generations, are just really desirous of using technology, having more flexibility, in their schedules so they don't have to work or be, kind of button seat for as long as what has normally been expected. And compensation models, like all of that stuff, it has the possibility to evolve when you really think in this way.
Yeah, a huge highlight for me, because you've mentioned the younger generation several times. And I think traditionally the idea in the industry up to this point has been like, yeah, but who's got the money, right? I think we see a lot of dealers that are like, but who has the money? Well, most would argue, or many would argue, well, it's my mother-in-law or it's my parents' generation that have all the money. But if you're focused on money today, okay, maybe there's some justification in your thought process. But to your point about the younger generation, and maybe even writing off millennials, right? Like, I guess technically I'm a millennial, but I've already owned 5 vehicles, 6, and I will probably own what? I don't know. Who knows how I feel? Maybe there's 10 more, 12 more. I don't know how long I'm going to live. My kids think forever. So that could be an infant. But if you're looking at lifetime value of a customer, to your point about younger generation, I think it's tremendous if you can bring on younger people who, by the way, only want to talk over text message or right. Instagram DMs and things of that nature. And you have people that can already speak that language and meet them where they're at. In addition to all of the other things, you're going to have happier employees and because of that, they're going to be more willing to work or put in the extra effort, which has a correlation to P&L, even though you can't really see it. And for those of you not familiar with the acronym in this industry, so loaded with acronyms, profit and loss statement, right? Being a chief, profit and loss is going to show you the salary of that employee, but it's not going to tell you whether they're happy or not.
That's right.
And so I love that you're tying it into kind of this thing, and also just the tie into the younger generation and focusing on lifetime value. It's all about adapting and being, I love the word you use, flexible in meeting them where they're at. So for dealer listening today, or salesperson or managers that are listening to this episode today, and they're really thinking along these lines, they're now focused on their sales process and looking for friction points. They're understanding the impact that technology or embracing it can have on productivity, profitability.
Mm-hmm.
What's something that you would say to them today to really get that ball moving forward? Like to get buy-in, to say, hey, everybody, we're moving in this direction. What's the best way to make that happen?
I think when you start to talk about these things, it's about inclusivity, right? It's about bringing them into the fold early in that conversation and being able to participate. We've both been in this industry for a long time. We know oftentimes you'll have a dealer principal go to a conference and they'll see this shiny new technology and they'll bring it back and say, we're doing this.
Right.
And the team doesn't fully embrace it because they're like, oh, that's the flavor of the month. It'll be out next week. And so one of the keys in my mind is to getting everybody excited is bringing them into the fold early and being part of that decision and part of that evolution, of what that new process is going to look like. I think there's, to your point before about, the younger generation, they crave that type of involvement. They want to be heard, right? Maybe, over text or Instagram, as you said. No, I'm kidding. As employees, they want to be heard.
Right.
And so it just gives them that extra sense of empowerment that they crave as a generation. And then in the end, it's just going to drive better results because they're bought in from the beginning.
Love it. What can you say to those that still perhaps feel a measure of hesitation about taking the leap and embracing technology more?
To be cliche, like Nike, just do it. No, just
rip the Band-Aid off.
No, I think, it can sound very overwhelming, especially as we talk about, sales process. And I think people think, oh, I'm going to overhaul my sales process. I'm not ready for that. But it doesn't have to be that. You can start with a very small team, in the dealership that just owns this. We have a lot of stores that, put together, they call it like an express store team. And it's just maybe, 2 or 3 people that really own it and handle it. And what is interesting about that approach for the hesitant dealer is they will start to show success to the rest of the dealership. Mm. So once they start showing everybody how easy this is and how much more they can do from a productivity standpoint, then people start to perk up and like, hey, I want that. And so it's a more organic way, I think, to get buy-in if you're a little hesitant to take the leap and overhaul everything, which I could understand. We have some dealerships who jumped in like full bore, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But I think you're a unicorn that you did that, because human nature, we don't want to change. It's like a defense mechanism. So I think that's one approach that I would recommend for somebody who's hesitant, is just to start small, take a team that can handle the customer from end to end, and let everybody else see that success.
Yeah. And truth be told, you probably already have, 2 or 3 at least people on your team who would jump at the opportunity to be in an express. Like they're like, oh, that is my jam. They've probably already been thinking about either quitting or what can I do differently? And if you brought this to, I love your stance or your vantage point on inclusive leadership. The idea of counseling with your team, that doesn't remove the fact that you're the leader. Everybody knows you're the leader. Throw your ego out for a minute and just include people and realize that even the youngest or newest member on your team still has been alive. They were alive before they got to you, which means they've gained or garnered life experience, which gives them a different way of looking at things and everybody's opinion, and bringing them into the fold. I think that's just such powerful advice. And I love what you're saying, like setting up this express store. Like there's people on your team already that would want to be a part of this, guaranteed. Amazing. Michelle Denogean, not to be confused with Denim Jean. Yes, as you so graciously helped me remember when we were doing our Kijiji thing a couple weeks ago. I'm so glad that you were able to join me for this conversation. I think this is really powerful stuff, and hopefully helps those that are considering how can I do this in an effective, strategic way, embrace the technology. I love that we were also able to kind of break down where you need to be at in order for this to work for you. And hopefully that's not to discourage, people that don't feel like they're in that position. Chances are you're probably more in that position than you think you are. But as you dig in and apply the principles that Michelle has shared with us today, I believe you are going to move into the future, provide an experience that your customers both expect and are desirous. And man, you're just going to stand out in the market. I think that's the biggest, tremendous thing that can happen here. Aside from, the profitability and all that kind of stuff, like you're going to stand out. You're going to be that store in your market with an easy open if you just do things the right way. Michelle, thanks so much for joining me on the Dealer Playbook podcast. How can those listening get in touch with you?
Yeah, super easy. My email address is Michelle with 2 L's at roadster.com. So feel free to shoot an email over. I answer all of them. So I'd love to hear from everybody.
You're amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Michael Cirillo, and you've been listening to the Dealer Playbook podcast. If you haven't yet, please click the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now. Leave a rating or review and share it with a colleague. If you're ready to make big changes in your life and career and want to connect with positive, nurturing automotive professionals, join my exclusive DPB Pro community on Facebook. That's where we share information, ideas, and content that isn't shared anywhere else. I can't wait to meet you there. Thanks for listening.